start live streaming, please just click on that button as usual, where you are at to confirm that you accept this the program is being live streamed. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. A quarter past 8 o'clock in the United Kingdom, in a very rainy Newcastle, live on 75 W Radio, live on Ummah Connected, on YouTube, on Facebook, and Zoom. Here is Calm. Let's talk with me, Kassim Kayira. Tonight, very difficult conversation, as I flagged up earlier. We're going to be talking about sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, incest in homes, and domestic violence to an extent. All these combined, but it's more the impact on our communities, because as the Ugandan community has been growing over the years, it has brought problems that we never thought were our problems to our door front. If you look at things like knife violence, knife crime, and so on, these were things that we used to hear in other communities. It is not something that, we could be getting. But right now, we've ended up in a situation where actually we are in the midst of it. We have had cases within our own community of children who have been stabbed, children who have ended up in jail, children, all sorts of circumstances that we never thought were really part of our problem. But now we are sitting directly in the heat of the moment. Isma, if we can just give us that little clip, just to give us a teaser into tonight's conversation before I introduce my guest. Thank you very much. Isma, if you're ready, let's have that clip, please. Isma, whenever you are ready with the clip. If not yet, then there's no harm. Yeah, okay. It's like it's coming up. Yes, that's Trevor Noah, a very famous, what should I say, comedian, but who has, he has something that he was saying that I found quite powerful. Please, if you can just listen to this to kickstart our conversation tonight.
You know, a few days ago, I was at an event, and people were having really interesting and dynamic conversations about really difficult topics, men, women, young and old alike. And every few minutes, somebody would start their opinion with the phrase, "Now, I would never say this in public, but," or "I would never say this if I was being recorded, but." And I found that fascinating. So many of us have opinions and ideas about the world that we live in that we are either unable, unwilling, or too scared to share. And I thought to myself, if we cannot have conversations about difficult things, if the conversations themselves are now the difficult things, then what hope do we have of fixing the difficult things?
Well, I think normally, ordinarily, I wouldn't be saying this in public, but we have a situation that has made, us have to discuss some of the difficult conversation that we're going to have tonight. And it's sexual abuse, but it's not just sexual abuse out of the blue. It is sexual abuse inside our homes, in families. Normally, you'll find that the people that engage in this are people that are close to us, maybe relatives, sometimes even siblings, and that is something that should worry any parent wherever you are. There are situations that we wish we didn't know, and we wished didn't happen, but quite often you'll find that somehow, somewhere, this comes to come into our midst. What can we do about it in a situation where we find ourselves, in that particular situation? And we'll be trying to address a couple of questions. Questions, for instance, what is the difference between, rape, sexual assault, sexual abuse? What are the signs, for example, that someone might be a survivor of such an abuse? Who is at risk of sexual violence? Is there help for people who probably get traumatic symptoms emanating from that? Does someone who has suffered, sexual abuse always have injuries, like visible injuries, for instance. How do we deal with the culture and sensitivities? There are particular things that even in, for example, in Uganda, you may not find a word for sexual abuse because, or incest, for instance, because these were things that were taboo. They were things that were never meant to happen. And when they do happen, then they raise particular questions. As community, as society evolves and develops, we find ourselves in the midst of this. COVID, I think, brought a new phenomenon with the lockdown and people being bound into these limited, restricted spaces. A lot of realities, especially surrounding domestic violence, sort of came to the fore. Some of the things that we didn't know because we went into lockdown and children, young girls came out of lockdowns pregnant, and you would have wondered for people who were locked up indoors, how could that have happened? Now, there are some painful realities that happen within families, and it is taboo to almost discuss this. But you realize that for us to be able to address and treat this problem, we must touch it head on. We must go for it head on. And that means having to talk about the elephant in the room, having to address it. And the more we talk about it, definitely and hopefully, there should be a solution that can come out of that. Remember, if you have any ideas that you'd like, maybe you have a question, you can raise your hand the Zoom way just by clicking on that button with the raising the hand, or you can type a message or type your message in the chat room, and we'll pick up the messages for the Shylocks who probably are first timers or who can't speak because they're at work. You can always drop us a message in the chat room, and inshallah we'll pick up on it. Now, the realities that we have to address tonight, we have a special guest, have an expert in this area, someone who spoke, at the convention, and it was from the convention, very few minutes, but I felt that these were minutes that were actually very worthwhile. Best way to actually address that was, let's find a bigger opportunity, a bigger platform like today's, and be able to talk about these issues. It may be painful, but I think we should be able to face up to it. He's a forensics expert, both in the NHS and works with the Metropolitan Police. And therefore, she has had, if not seen at all. When it comes to our communities, what sort of impact does this have? Increasingly, we are getting relationships in trouble. Husband has fallen out with wife. Oftentimes, I've had it in the UK, but a lot more in the US, where you hear husband being accused of having sexually assaulted or molested his own daughter or a child in the home. And quite often, after several years of someone serving jail term, it comes to be found out that the person was innocent and it never happened. In cases where it has happened, definitely it is something that must be abhorred. But the idea is, should you, as a spouse, jilted and angry, scorned, take it upon a man and lie or belie upon them with such a huge crime? What sort of implications does that have? Not only on the person, on the victim that has been accused, but also on the family. How does that play out? And is there something that we can do about it? In cases where it becomes very heavy, what can you do, for example, if you are a parent who comes to realize that, for example, your son, and God forbid, has been molesting his sister, a sibling, inside the house? How do you face up to it? Is there any support publicly? Because many of us now fear the stigma that comes with that. As a result, you try to sort of sit on the issue. That does not provide a solution. We'll be trying to delve into some of these areas. And if you have any questions, difficult questions, we have the expert. But as usual, we have other experts here, and that is you. Your experiences actually make this program what it is, because from your experiences, we actually get the experts coming to explain and expound more. We also have experts, social workers, for example, listening into the conversations, and therefore they can come in at different perspectives into this. Are you one of that person that probably has had to deal with it? How heavy was it? Is it different in the UK as opposed to the US, as opposed to Canada, as opposed to Uganda? It may be that probably the situations are different. We are just about to find out. Rashida, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the conversation.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much for taking the time and agreeing to come on. I think it would be best if we can have you on video. It's just a natural disposition that people would feel much more comfortable if they can actually see you, because one, that brings in authority, but also brings in confidence. Someone feels more reassured, knowing that they are not speaking to an AI Rashida. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'll just add you there. Add spotlight. Yes, Rashida, thank you very much for joining us. Well, let's now, we are sort of tackling the elephant in the room, a very taboo subject in a lot of ways, but yet one that we must address. How big a problem, for example, is sexual assault inside homes or in homes?
Should I take that question?
Oh yes, please. Yes. Let's kick off.
So sexual violence, this and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and you've explained everything very very well, thoroughly, and I think literally, I think sometimes we have to really talk about the elephant in the room, and I think a lot of the times that elephant in the room is literally something that is eating up everyone within homes or families, but it's very difficult to divulge that information and to actually voice the information of something that is going on for one. So these are very, unfortunately, our communities, unless we have this information shared across to all of us, and I think as the first clip that we watched there, clearly explains that there are sometimes that we're afraid to say this, and we usually say, if I wasn't, if I was somewhere else, then I would have been in position to say this. Why am I saying that? Is because sexual violence, not until I worked at the Havens, then I realized that sexual violence really does exist. I've worked in this field for now 15 years. So I've literally seen so many examples that actually you think you've seen it all, and then something else comes up and you're like, really? So sexual violence, where should I start from? So in terms of sexual violence does mimic domestic violence as well, because when we start with families, when we start with marital marriages, where we're thinking actually domestic violence or sexual violence doesn't happen within homes. The reason why so many people don't understand that there is the concept of sexual violence there is the not understanding of the definition. If we start with the definition of rape, so definition of rape is having sexual, unwanted or non-consensual sexual contact with anyone without their consent. Now, I am more than happy. I would like to have some sort of interaction. If anyone has got a question, please feel free to ask it. But we all know that consent speaks volumes in the world of sexual violence. But then when we're talking about consent, we have to be very mindful that we're not necessarily forgetting that this consent goes down to when we're talking about children, we can't say, when we're talking about adults and children, we can't say, well, after all, someone said consent, and actually the 13-year-old gave consent to so-and-so having sexual intercourse with this child. So let's not forget that, oh, actually this child wanted to have this sexual activity, and then, but how old is the child? The child is a 12-year-old or a 20-year-old man. Is that really consent? Those are the definitions that we have to make sure that we understand. When we go into adults, obviously making sure that, and the definitions sort of vary. And the reason I wanted to make definitions clearer in terms of consent and making sure that people understand what rape is, because sexual violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, even someone just giving you unwanted touches, unwanted, there are different ways of sexual violence. It's not necessarily penetration that is defined as rape, because so many people would think, actually, he didn't do anything, he didn't penetrate me, he didn't do that. but this is how these things sort of start. And it could be in marriages, or it could be, and the implications are really big in the sense that what happens when something like this happens, you know. So I don't know
So,
whether
while you're still at the issue of consent, since you said let's go slowly so that we can, make sure we have everybody on board. On the issue
yeah,
of consent, when it comes to especially our African communities, there are
yeah,
times that you'll find that our sort of language. I mean, you come to the West and they will tell you, for example, if someone, if I fold my hands, like if I'm talking to you and my hands are like this, in an African sense, that is politesse, that's politeness. In an English way, the Western world, that is almost blocking off. I'm sort of distancing myself from you. There's the African consent where someone, just goes, "Nze chimveko, chimveko," but chimveko in actual sense, chimveko, but while the chimveko, they know almost coming to mean yes. How do you draw the line between the chimveko African way to the real, no, 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 as no meaning no?
and I think this is where it's called drawing the line. This is where, and I'll give you a little, I'll give you an analogy, whereby the definition of chimveko, nechitamveko, like where the definition sort of crosses the line. So I'll give you an example, and I apologize if it comes across sort of differently. So there is a video which is called the T video. And the T video, anyone can Google that and you can look, it's called the T video about consent. So if you came to me and gave me
That's
T,
as in TEA or T, just the
yeah, TEA.
Yeah.
So I will give you a very simple analogy of what I mean with the T video. If I came to you, or if I went for a visit and and you came to the sitting room and you found me seated and you're like, "Rashida, do you want tea?" And I would say to you, "Oh, I think I want tea." And then you go on and you do other bits and pieces, and then you come later to me and you say, "Oh, Rashida, I forgot to give you tea. Do you still want tea?" And I'll be like, "Oh, I still want tea. I still want tea, 2 sugars and 2 milks." Then you find me asleep, right? If you find me asleep, at that point I'm asleep. Are you going to ask me if I want tea? At that point, my wanting tea, which I told you at the beginning of the conversation, doesn't still stand because I'm now asleep. You can't give me tea, if it makes sense, because I told you I wanted tea at the beginning of our conversation, and me and you were having a joke. And then I told you, you can give me tea. It's all right to give me tea. Later on, you came back and I said, I think I still want tea. You found me asleep. You took so long to give me the tea. Now you found me asleep. Now, do you put tea down my throat, or do you actually wait until I wake up and you give me that tea? Does that make sense?
Ish. Can I leave the cup there next to you until you wake up? Because it was a tea.
No, take the tea back. Right. Take the tea back, wait for me to wake up, and then ask me again if I want to take that tea. So that's the difference. And I've used a very simple analogy.
Right. Okay, well, I think that brings it in now. So you have worked for 15 years in this process. So 15 years. Yeah. Well, how bad is it as a problem inside our community? Because many people would just be thinking these are things that are out there. But within our community, have you been seeing sort of trends? What have been the trends within our community?
So the trends within our community, it's mainly around talking to our children. I've seen so many cases. I mean, if I give you, if I start with teenagers, I mean, when I first started there, I saw a 4-year-old boy, and the 4-year-old boy, someone had made him do things to a 16-year-old had made him do things to him. And that was one of the youngsters I saw for a forensic medical examination. And it broke my heart. Why? Purely because a 4-year-old boy hardly understands what his own private is and what is defined and what's called. And if you then go and get a 4-year-old boy to get them to do activities on you, then how do you draw the line later on to tell him that actually there's a boundary between A and there's a boundary between B? But in terms of what is common within our communities, I've seen youngsters, so many girls. I've seen 12-year-olds who almost, because obviously these days girls are very much they're wearing makeup, they're wearing all sorts of things. Girls here, some of them are quite advanced in the sense that even the way their growth, you may think you would say 12-year-old and you won't think she's a 12-year-old. So there's a lot of things that sort of mimic. And within our communities, we know there's people are being strict. And what are children going to do? Children are going to go on elsewhere, because actually, if mom's told me if I'm going to go to someone else's house and do that, and then as a result of that, there's other people they get involved with who are engaged in doing so many other things. And as a result of that, they were coerced into doing those sexual activities. And then as a result, they sort of carry on from day on, and then it becomes almost the norm, because someone only has to do it once to someone. When we go back to the tea, someone only asks you to give you tea in the first instant. You say yes to that tea. They might not necessarily go as far as anything, but they've sort of almost prompted, and they know how far they can go, especially with youngsters, in a sense that actually now I've asked her to do something. Now I know the next time I can ask her to even go farther. So children, very common, because they run away from home, because they go over to sleepovers, because they sometimes it's gang initiation, whereby a child will sort of fall into the wrong hands, and they will be forced to actually perform sexual activities for different reasons. And then with regards and let's not forget, some children are not necessarily in that sort of right state of mind. There's something called gilly competent, when a child understands what's going on in terms of sexual activities, and there's also not understanding what is going on around what is being happening. And in terms of if say, for example, if it's a gang and a child goes into those wrong hands, they don't have anyone. If they don't feel free to talk to their parents, then they feel actually they've got a safe space, and they feel that that is the safe space where they can actually divulge what's going on for them. Then they go ahead and sort of engage in these different sexual activities. When we go to young children, it's the making sure. I don't know if you want to ask me any question. I can pause a bit.
Well, the question is what is in the chat room, but I thought, I mean, we could first of all finish exploring this, and then we can come to the question, because it just goes back to the definition of rape. Although now you have gone into the depth of what we are seeing within the sort of the trends, the patterns within our own community, and sort of, if we have reason to worry. But I mean, you are still delving into that just in terms of the telltale signs, in terms of what is pushing these young people to be there. And also now the whole TikTok, Instagram generation, where makeup now has become, so much available, and the children might not even actually, sort of tell their age. They are children who grow faster than their age. I mean, they look older than they actually are. When it comes to the issue of consent now that actually we've gone back to that, how would you address that? How would you check? Would you start asking now for someone's ID to sort of ascertain their age, because they may be 13, 14, 15, and yet they look 20? Or because already, first of all, they've already started, being, say, sexually active in schools, for example, where a lot of the pressures come from. Girls are pushed and forced to have boyfriends. Not to have a boyfriend at school is like a failure in life for many. So the kind of pressure that is put on them starts from school, and then it starts now outside. So on the issue of consent now, how would you ascertain consent for a person? And Hajat Sarah, I think in the chat room, saying, how would you define rape in marriage? Because the mere fact that there is a marriage, it means that sex is a given, and that's set up as automatically consensual.
Yeah, I hear you. And And I think that's a very, it's a very big subject, in a sense that so many, in fact, that is something that I'm going to talk about. Someone is coming to film me next week, and it's the documentary which is going to be aired, I think, somewhere in October. It's around domestic violence. Now, within marriages, and we know some of the cases we usually see is a woman, by the time a woman comes to the havens for a forensic, or by the time a woman reports sexual violence, it could have happened so many times. Now, I've given you a definition of rape is unwanted or having sexual intercourse without someone's consent. It's very clear. It's very clear. Consent is the key in terms of any sexual activity. Now, and I think this is where the boundary is sort of quite blurry, in a sense that if your husband and wife, the husband is entitled to that. Now, I don't think that if we take this topic into Islam, I don't think Islam warrants a man to go and literally just go blatant on a woman just like that and have sexual intercourse with them without actually them giving that sort of consent. So it's that sort of, it's because this doesn't just go on to a day-to-day thing. It even, Islam can elaborate on this and tell you that a man goes to their wife if the wife is in the mood, or if there is that mutual understanding, or there is some sort of forgiveness, if there's anything that they haven't, unresolved business. Because I know most of the time it's things that are unresolved that led a woman to having to not wanting to have sex. But in a sense that if a woman, if there's those resolved issues and with between you and your husband, then you're in position to actually go and have that sort of, when you're in that condition and it's amicable, you know. But as long as there is no consent, that is where it goes to unwanted sex, and that is where the definition of rape comes in. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Can consent change? Because when it comes to that now,
100%.
It might be deep. It might be that consent is granted at one moment, and
Yeah.
I'll allow the audience also to come in at some point. If you have something burning, please just raise your hand, and then I'll bring you in, so that it's not just a sort of, it's a dialogue, or it's a trialogue rather, because it's between me and Rashida and you. So does consent change? Because it may be that consent is granted at a certain point and then it is withdrawn. At the point of withdrawal, it is too difficult to sort of take it back for the person who has been granted in the past.
Which is totally understandable. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes back to the tea video.
All right.
Okay. If I don't want tea if I don't want tea 5 minutes later, do not pour tea down my throat.
No, it may be that consent now was granted probably by the suggestive way, because communication is also different. It might be that someone does not say. For someone to actually say, can we have it? It becomes a bit difficult. It feels a bit even vulgar. It feels so runyachitara-ish, because you would find that it's someone who is coming from a background probably where they can just say things, but the Musajjo Muganda, you know, the Musajjo Muganda would have a way of communicating in such a way that it is by implication that you sort of see what the person wants, and it's also by implication that the person consents without necessarily saying it. So it gets to a point where, for example, consent was granted and then someone wakes up and then they decided, because you have those unresolved issues which might not be related to this. Someone comes and says, alleges that consent was not given. How would you then be able to sort of exonerate oneself in such a case, forensically?
And exactly, you've made a point. And it's interesting because a lot of times domestic violence cases, usually when they come for forensic medical, because when we're looking at the sperm, we're not necessarily looking, because we're not looking at this sperm was yesterday when they consented and this sperm is today when they haven't consented. So it becomes very difficult. And when we're looking for rape, when we're doing forensic medical examinations, we're looking for DNA, or we're looking for someone's DNA, or we're looking for someone's DNA or sperm. Now, in domestic violence cases like that, or in marriages, it can be very difficult in a sense. However, when cases like this are reported, the police don't just look at the sperm and the DNA that is present in someone's in one. They look at there's other concepts, and usually for the case, for someone to come to us, because when someone reports sexual violence, the police not only just looks at what you've reported, they will take your phone, they will look at all your phone, they will look at all the correspondences that you've been having, they will look at every little bit of you, they will look for other people, they will ask for statements from other people, they can even ask your children. So there's so many other things that are involved. Whereas it's different if someone has been assaulted and we're looking for DNA and we're like, actually, that person has been assaulted because we found their DNA and we found semen. Therefore, that DNA is run on the national database and we know that this person is a rapist. It's different from a husband because it just comes down to consent. It's the CPS who now have to look at the whole dynamics of what's happened. This is why things are much more difficult to contend with when especially there is children involved, it's a marriage, and because so many times if it's not resolved, it comes down to consent, of which consent can't necessarily be. That would be the judge to make that decision and CPS to make that decision.
Rashida, I did raise the issue of Chimveko, the Chiganda way, and I think someone in the chat room, and there's actually a lady who was, it's Amina here, who was, texted us in the chat room to say, can a consent also be weighed at me staying quiet or saying no? The Chimveko, by implication, sort of break down that route. Just like Janet says, apparently consent can be withdrawn in the middle of the act, which makes it very, very difficult. So to the consent now, I don't think I got a very clear answer to that, especially coming from the perspective, the African perspective, and how that would play in the law here, because our ways of saying the no is in fact in Kinyarwanda it's even much more funny the way the way they put it. If you hear, you use the T video, the T video on consent, which we have found now. I think shortly we'll play it just to help our audience understand.
Yes, please.
Yeah. But the Kinyarwanda way, the funny way of Kinyarwanda is when you go to a girl, it's in the village, it's in their home, they are home alone, and she will just say, Nyibi Siriza is the word, the Chimveko is in Kinyarwanda is translated as Nyibi Siriza. So the girl will be saying, Nyibi Siriza, just says, leave me alone, but she's adding something, and she says, Nyibi Siriza, no murugo ndiyo again, like, leave me alone, after all, I'm even home alone. So the person is giving you the implication that if you are fearing that there would be someone at home, awakandi owns a car. Nyibi Siriza nani karisunamba, leave me alone, I'm not even wearing a knicker. Like it gets so funny, but it's someone that is indicative in some way. It's leading to the person. Can that consent now that that has come in a form of a no, but a no that is very African in nature, be withdrawn? Can that become problematic at some?
It can, and I will give you another. It's more like a myth where someone says, how can she say she was raped? After all, she didn't fight him. After all, she wanted it. So and so many times that's a myth that people sort of think that if you haven't fought someone off, that means you wanted it. Or if you haven't said, so many cases that we've seen, when something happens now, I'm not talking about the issue where someone says Chimveko, but then there's actually other signals that one is like you're sending different other signals, and you actually it's different. However, there's a different
how
way.
do you tell the difference, Rashid? And that's where the dilemma is, because once it becomes a case that goes before the law, because you are not filming, it's not like you are holding a phone and you are filming the Chimveko, which was implying, implying that the person wanted it. And that's where the dilemma is. How once it has become a legal issue, then it's your word against the other person.
Yeah. So usually what happens is the myth that happens is that it means that if someone hasn't said stop, or if someone didn't say, because sometimes some people said, well, she enjoyed it after all, or he enjoyed it after all, but did they really enjoy it? Sometimes there is that sort of defense mechanism where someone actually goes into that freeze, fright, and whatever something else is there. So, and actually someone may not necessarily say stop, or someone may not necessarily say, and I'm talking about the blitz, I'm talking about that where someone has really coerced and forced you. So when we talk about the chimveko of like the dilly darling chimveko, but then really it's more like you're calling for it, to be honest. But then there is someone who is really sort of saying, you know, I don't want it, but then someone overpowers you. Does it make a is there a difference? Can you get the difference? If someone overpowers you, and after all you're like, you know what, your body actually goes into a shock. And this is what happens to some women, that their body will go into a shock and they will literally just let the activity carry on. It doesn't necessarily mean that they've wanted it. It doesn't mean that they want it, they've wanted it, or they've enjoyed it. But it means that their body has just actually gone into that sort of freeze, fright, stop mode, and for the perpetrator to do what they have to do. And sometimes some people don't, and some people actually dissociate. They let the activity go on, but actually they're not there, but because they want to protect themselves. There's a slight difference of the jokeable chimveko and actually I don't want to do this, can you leave me alone? And then someone empowers you, and then they carry on doing what they want to do, and in the end you're like, you know what, I don't have anything to do, and then your body goes into a freeze, and then the activity carries on. But does that mean you wanted it? No. I don't know if it's explained it better,
For Rashida,
because
yes, I
obviously
get,
it's harder.
yeah, the dilemma,
Huh?
that I'm trying to deal with is now we
Mm,
have placed ourselves, we've become the fly on the wall, sort of looking into the circumstances where someone has overpowered someone, or they are someone respectable, because you get into a situation,
mm,
you've gone into a minister's office, you've gone into a director's office, you are looking for support, funding for a project, blah, blah. And the person almost wants to sort of condition it on this. So someone taking
mm.
advantage literally of the
Yep.
particular situation. So while the
Mm,
body can go into shock mode and so on, all of that I'm sort of understanding it. But now we've come to a situation where post this situation, you end up at the police station where you've gone to report this. The circumstances under which this happened, whether this is your word, but the other person's understanding might be that while it looked like it was overpowering, the
mm,
person got the other message, that the implication was you wanted it. In fact, here Safina is saying in Islam, they say when a girl or woman keeps quiet, then it's a yes. So I hear, Safina, that's not correct. That this is only in the case of being asked whether they want to marry a man or not. And that consent is a consent of shyness. It has that chimveko element. If they were uncomfortable, that can still be read. And women now, our girls are becoming much more blunt now to speak for themselves. You don't take them just for granted. Ajat Sarah is saying actually most African men have a belief that a woman's no is a yes. I think that's kind of true in a lot of senses, but it just depends on the circumstances. It's just that once we are now find ourselves inside a legal situation, how we come now to try to save this man who might have been innocently dragged to believe that this person was it thought, because in the heat of the moment, people sort of lose themselves. And I'm
mm,
trying to understand this man who got the Chimveko that was emphatic, but in the circumstances, taking it to mean the yes. Anyway, probably that's something that is kind of variable, and therefore someone could give it a different interpretation.
mm.
Jaden, I saw your hand up. I think you wanted to raise something, Rashida. Please go ahead, Jaden. Oh, sorry, I just muted you as you're coming on. Unmute yourself, please, Jaden. Speak to Rashida, please.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi
Wa
wabarakatuh.
alaikum salam.
I think this whole business of consent and rape is so much westernized, and the wind blows so much against men. And I have two issues here, because men are supposed to know the age of a woman by just looking at her. So when a girl dresses, say, a 14-year-old girl, lots of makeup, dresses sexually, and goes into a nightclub, smokes and drinks, the man is supposed to know her age. But a man being a man will look at those signs which indicate that the 14-year-old is a woman, and he takes her for the night, or he consensually, they go out. But when things turn wrong, the man is blamed for going out with a child. But this is a child who has gone out appearing like a woman. So everything weighs out against the man. And then in my line of business, when I'm treating trauma cases, I come across people, women mostly, who say they were traumatized and abused when they were at a certain age. They didn't give consent or withdrew consent at the time when the act was going on. Now, to a man, there are certain noises or there are certain sounds which a man interprets as go on, continue. But to a woman, when they make those sounds, to them, they are protesting the act. So how is the man supposed to interpret that, those sounds? I don't know how you call it. To interpret them when somebody is saying no in a way which may indicate that go on. So those are two dilemmas where the
yes, this is a very difficult, a thin line, a thin line
yes.
that becomes really difficult. The deeper you look into it, the more challenging it becomes. And Rashida has really taken the trouble to try to delve into it. But I think, and I think this is where we'll need to be absolutely careful. And Rashida probably help us, because now we are coming from two systems, born and bred, in an African setting where our view of certain things is different. Not violence is never really supported or whatever, but it might come across in a way, that is different. But then coming now, person who has grown up in that sort of environment, coming here where now issues of consent and the definitions are such, as Jaden says, very westernized in the way that it comes in. I can see Aisha's hand up. I'll come to you, Aisha. Let's first hear Rashida's response to this, please. Jaden, Rashida, sorry.
So, two things. I've had the gentleman talk about the clothing and talk about the way some children are dressed, the way that sometimes, obviously, I know some of the girls could sort of seem older than their age and everything else. I just want to sort of to put one point out there, that the victim or the girl's behavior or their choice of clothing does not mean that they're consenting to a sexual activity. I think we need to get that correct, and I think this is where the lines are blurry sometimes, because, and again, that's a myth from really back in the days, whereby omuwala ndaba yeyayicheyagalidde yabadde ayambadde kampi. That doesn't happen anymore. Even that is not one of the reasons why that CPS will take on board and say we're taking this case to court, just because one of the things yabadde ayambadde kampi and then bamukute because she sort of
she was inviting, she was calling.
Yeah, she was inviting that. No, she wasn't. Someone's behavior or clothing does not necessarily mean that they're consenting to that. And this is what it goes back to what I was saying, that someone's emotions, i.e., people react differently to a sexual trauma. People react differently to trauma. How? Some may react to trauma by laughing. Some may react to trauma by crying. Others may not even show any emotion, or others may show a bit of emotion, and it doesn't necessarily. I mean, there is something I could have said here, but as Trevor said, I couldn't say it when it's being aired online, because
you'd rather say it. I think that's why we said we're going to have a difficult conversation, because I think it's an adult session.
We're all, so women, I'm talking about women here now. If any woman is going to be penetrated, And it doesn't necessarily mean that when that woman is penetrated, just because they're lubricated, it means their body is calling for sex or their body is actually accepting sex. It doesn't mean that. Women naturally have those natural responses that may happen even during a trauma. Now, when that happens, it doesn't necessarily mean that actually she was even lubricated. It means that she wanted the sex because her body actually responded to the sexual activity. I don't know oba omwami oyo ngenda kubanga mumuzeemu bulungi. Naye it does not necessarily mean that one's body reaction, like I've said, people's way of responding to trauma, because someone could be hysterical and someone will be like, oh, she's really hysterical. She's probably enjoying this activity. That hysterical bit that is going on is actually their way of surviving. I will give you an example. There was a case that I dealt with, and it was a few years ago. It was in the news, and you may even Google it. It was in the news. I probably won't tell you where it is, but it was one of the parks in London. I saw that client who attended. Now, that client the person had anally, vaginally, orally raped them on a spot. It was a stranger. Someone just literally, she was going home, attacked. She went past her home. She was going home and she was attacked by a stranger. Now, she came for forensic medical, the police brought her for forensic medical examination and we were dealing with it. And I was the person dealing with that client at the time. And I asked her all the questions and up to today, I can tell you, I still wonder how she is today. Why? These are the reasons. This girl had been assaulted from all three orifices, orally, vaginally, anally, by a stranger. This girl, as I was talking to her, she was very calm, very collected, because someone may have a definition of someone whose something has happened like that. They would be falling apart, they would be dying, they would be want to be. I remember going into the forensic room and I came out and I was speaking to her and I said, oh, how are you guys getting on? And she said, oh, we're booking a flight to Paris. Now, are we saying that what happened to her was false, or what happened to her was called for? Did she want it? Why am I giving you that example? Is because something so tragic had happened, but what she was planning a holiday to go to Paris. Why? That was her defense mechanism. That was her coping mechanism. That was the way that was going to help her understand. You know what her words were? I'm glad I'm still alive. So do you understand? So the concept of these things really varies. People react very differently in trauma. In so many marriages, women let men sleep with them, not for the sake of that they want it, but for the sake of peace, of having peace, having a wonderful home carry on and making sure that the children don't have to hear what's going on next door and everything else. Just because that's their response mechanism of letting things happen.
Now, Rashida, Hajat Sarah here tends to agree with Jaden to an extent, saying JP might be right. One may say that the man is killing them in enjoyment, and another may say the same thing when they mean it literally, and later on say they were raped. So drawing the line, I think, is still one difficult area where I don't know how you deal with it forensically.
And this is where again it gets and again I always I envy the job of the CPS, because the Crown prosecutions are the ones who let the case to sort of progress to court if this is going to court. And I think we have to understand that even the Crown prosecution and the police and everyone else, they also do understand that people make false allegations. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that the perpetrators, all the perpetrators are doing that, are all in the wrong, because sometimes some of them are not actually perpetrators. Some of them have been defined as perpetrators, but they're not perpetrators. So there's different concept in which, so let's go to a subject of exactly what she said, but in a concept of, say, for example, if it's a custody battle, and someone says that, or a marriage that wants to break up, the woman wants to break up from the husband. The first thing that they will tell the police, he's raped me. And the first thing that they will tell the police, I don't want to go back to that house. I want to be moved. So her main priority is not the rape, but her main priority is, I want a house. Does it make sense? So there is different concepts that we all understand. We all work in professionals whereby you're actually faced with the case and you can see clearly that whatever is going on here. By the way, the police do prosecute these people like that. So the police do prosecute cases like that where people make false allegations. So the police do realize. So it's not, I don't want you people to take away that actually every single person who is going to report is believed. Not everyone is believed. So the police will prosecute those who waste the police time.
Well, Aisha, I'm just about to come to you, but I just wanted to read this quick message from Safina in Canada. This is a global community conversation, and therefore we are traversing the entire globe. Rape cases, she says, are so hard to report. When someone thinks about the interrogation, where were you? Did you invite them in? Did you go to his house? Were your clothes torn, or were they taken off carefully, and the like? So that might be pushing people off actually getting to report. But let me get to Aisha. I think she might have a question or probably an intervention she would like to bring to you, Rashida. Aisha, go ahead, please. Oh, sorry, you are unmuting yourself, and I just clicked to ask you to unmute, muting you in the process. Unmute yourself, please. Okay.
Good evening, Sheikh Kayira.
Assalamu alaikum. Well, good evening.
Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks for the wonderful topic.
Pleasure.
Most of the things I wanted to say, Rashida has mentioned, and that's why my hand was quickly up. But there is a question for the gentleman. The gentleman is talking about obviously the dressing has been mentioned, talked about, but he was talking about that men are supposed to know the age of a woman. How are they supposed to know the age of the woman? And does the dressing indicate the age of the woman to him? And also another thing that I wanted to touch about was, yes, sometimes when people are raped, like Rashida said, they go into that mode of freezing, they react differently, but there is also a lubrication that comes out of anxiety. You know, when someone wants to run and, you know, that fight and flight mode, it brings so much shaking that somebody has that lubrication. So someone may think, oh, after all, they want it, but it's actually a reaction of fear that someone either goes to the toilet quickly or lubricates quickly. You know, you've seen those cases when someone is scared and they wet themselves.
It happens even to men. It happens to men when you are in an exam and they are beginning to tell you 10 minutes to go. You might end up actually doing things in your trousers.
Exactly. Yes. So in that rape, a man should not assume that because someone is wetting, you know, having that lubricant, they should not assume that it's all, you know, they want it.
Aisha, let me just even strengthen your point by a message that I've seen from all the way from Saudi Arabia. Like I said, tonight's program really is, as this program is always, global. From Saudi Arabia, we are hearing from Amina Namkwaya, who says she ever spoke to a victim from Saudi Arabia. She said it's not like she liked what Baba was doing. I think I'm assuming Baba was the boss, because she fought back and failed. But immediately when he comes in, she stops fighting because the body is also getting what it wants. So you be there like a rock, let the feelings of the body take control until the act is done. So that might be both a survival mechanism, but also the accidental lubrication that allows this to happen.
Yes, exactly.
So it can still constitute rape then in that sense. That it doesn't take away the fact that while someone was, you know, feeling like they were enjoying it, they were actually enjoying it. They were just allowing it so that it could pass, the situation could pass.
Exactly. So, Sheikh Kayira, I just want that question to be answered, please, from the gentleman, because he was talking about the age, that men know the age of a woman.
Oh, no.
Uh,
I think Jaden was misunderstood. I think what he said
okay.
was when a 12-year-old or 14-year-old girl dresses in such, well, scantily dresses, she might even have
Okay.
developed, for example, her breasts, her boost might look bigger than her age. And then when she puts on all this makeup, you get the misconception that she might look 18 or 20 when she's actually 13 or 14. I think that's how I understood it. Jaden, have I misrepresented you? Because I think Aisha is asking.
I think you got me right there, because the child will appear to be a mature woman.
Yes.
And then when they are caught in the act, the man is then questioned as to why he did not see the woman as a child. So the dress there was just bringing out the point that the man will not understand the child's age by the way she's dressed.
Especially when you look at the way they dress, if it's like proms or weekends, or I see at the races, there are times you got races here, like the races, there are ladies' nights. You find very young girls and they will be dressed in such a way. And by the time they are so drunk, sometimes they'll even, like push for it. And then once they wake up in the morning, reality sets in and they realize they can make a few quids here and there. And that now turns into something else.
Oh, thank you very much. Just to say, assumptions, I think this is where sometimes men would do that, just assume by the looks, but the actual girls who may look at 20.
Aisha, sorry. Amina here is also re-emphasizing the point. She says in the chat room, some footballers have been here where they've misunderstood the ages of the girls they took to their hotel rooms because they were just wearing, either adultish dresses and looking, with the makeup. Suddenly, makeup does exactly what it says on the tin. It makes you up, and that can make you look what you are not.
Sure.
All right. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you too.
Thank you very much. Safina, your hand is up, and we still have Rashida. Safina, go ahead, please. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
And as you come in, Hajat Sarah is saying in the chat room, some girls' bodies are so fully developed that they don't look their age, even without makeup, and that's very correct. Safina, good to have you all the way from Canada. Nice to have you on the show once again.
It's all the way from Missouri, not Canada.
Oh, it's Missouri. Oh my God, why am I thinking?
Maybe there should be another Safina somewhere in Canada.
Oh, fantastic. Yes.
Another interesting topic today.
Oh, barakallahu fikum.
And to start it off, I said these are things that are not talked about. Because when you talk about marital rape, these are things, in fact, it's the hardest thing for any married woman to talk about. Because many times they think as long as your husband paid bride price, then somehow they think maybe he owns you, he's free to enjoy wherever, whichever way. So this is why you find that some women have been forced to do things they're not comfortable with, especially when you talk about anal sex and stuff like that, because many people don't like it. But then if your husband wants it, so they end up forcing you. And it's the hardest thing to go and report to someone and tell them, this is what my husband did. Because even when you go to police, apart from recently, and in some cases, but if you're talking about back home in Uganda and you go tell that my husband raped me, in fact, even at the police station might end up laughing at you. So these are things that are so difficult. Same things to do with a kid. Because if your child came to you and told you, my dad is doing this, first of all, that's an abomination. You want to hush it up. How will society hear that the dad of the house has done something? So this is how many kids have been sexually abused, but then their cases don't go far if it's a member of the family, like a dad or an uncle or someone they know so close. So to avoid the family name being tarnished, they end up not talking about stuff like that.
Safina, I would like to bring Rashida here just on that very point before we lose it. I'm sure you have other points to make, but I wanted to bring her specifically on this issue. I think that would be incest. Cases like that, how are they dealt with in the police? Rashida, if you don't mind, please, you can come back again on video, please. Safina, I'll just mute you briefly, but I'll unmute you shortly. Rashida, if you don't mind, please, because we've got some people who've joined us later. Sheikh Shagaf, very good to have you in the conversation. Rashida was just pleading if you could get your video on, because there are people who have joined later and they didn't get a chance to see you. It helps a lot just in terms of the confidence to know who you are speaking to, especially from an expert's point of view. Yes, please. We've had Safina raises the issue of, a child, a girl comes and reports dad has been doing, stuff to me. And how do you handle such a case? Where do you begin from? Especially, I mean, where parents, first of all, would try to hide. So by the time probably they choose to come to the police, it might have happened several times, or go to a point where they are unable now to control it. How have you had such cases in the first place?
Yeah. So going back a bit on some of the things that the lady has touched on. So a few things. Can I just say, just before I touch on the sort of inter-family relationship rape and that, children, and I think this is really, when they say Nkubo Mulanga, like the emphasis is on men, and I know that children in this country appear more mature, they're all rounded up in their way, their figure, the way they please, and I don't know how we can spell it out, because any sexual activity with a child below the age of 13, whether they looked like there's no, you're going to jail. So it does not matter.
Below the age of 13.
Yes. So that is that, whether they looked 20 years old or 30 years old or whatever, for as long as they're below the age of 13, you're going to jail. And obviously, this is probably different. I don't want to assume this is the same thing that happens everywhere, because obviously we're talking about the Western countries. So, but this is really what happens. If you deal with a 12-year-old and you think and we get these cases. I've dealt with a girl who said she was 12, but she told the boy she was 16. Again, and the boy got done for that because the girl is only 12. So that is a no. There's no consent with any child below that age. That is a no consenting age. So that definitely. Then going on to...
So even the lie is not considered then, because if she lied, she was 16. The boy thinks she was 16 and she wasn't 16. How would you be able, because you don't move with an ageometer, something that would...
So, yeah. So again, if she lies, because the mere fact that you've had sexual intercourse with that child, obviously that is rape, because whether they've lied or not lied, there's no consent there. So as long as they're that age, lie or no lie, they cannot consent. So that's a no. So that's one. Then with regards to those are cases that we call incest, where obviously there is sexual relation within families, fathers. So I have one. I had a case of a 9-year-old, and if someone reports, so the consequences of within families, that's different, but the consequences of reporting a rape as an act of it still stands. If you've raped someone, that is still rape, no matter what, no matter whether it's family or not family, because everyone is given the same rape sentence, depending on what you've done. So that remains the same. Again, the law does not define family rape as different from any other rape. As long as it's rape, as long as it's defined as rape, you will go down for exactly the same amount of years compared to anyone else. That's another point. Then the point where it's maybe it's a uncle We do get those cases. I did one a few months ago. The girl was 9 years old. And every time uncle, the girl's mother died, the father was looking after, the father is bringing up the child on his own. And then every time the man goes to work, uncle was coming in, uncle was coming in to visit. And he was sexually assaulting this girl, only 9 years old. And again, the instinct of the older people really speaks volumes. Someone saw the signs, and someone did realize that something must have been going on. And on one day, I think it was a Saturday, she came in and found the uncle on top of the child, and 9-year-old. And I did that forensic. The girl gave a very good account. So please don't underestimate the accounts that your children give you. If a child tells you that so and so has done this, please listen to that. If a child says to you, actually so and so put their finger in my vagina, or so and so put their finger in my back passage, I'm using that as a very slight example, please listen to them. This child, only 9 years old, she gave a very good account. She said, uncle has been coming every time dad goes to work, and he's been coming. I tell you, as I speak, the man is still in prison. So that was a forensic that we did on this child. And it was very unfortunate because she was only 9. She had already started her period. And now we're panicking about pregnancy on a 9-year-old. So those things happen. And it was an uncle, it was the father's brother who was coming in to do that. Again, that's a no-no. There's no discussion about that. But what are the implications that come with it? You can imagine the family dynamics, you know. Obviously, I'm sure that must have really driven them apart because of what's happened. So with regards to cases like that, and we know these things happen, and I dealt with a case, and the girl who actually, she came to me about a year or so ago. She had come for an interview, and I had interviewed her for a job. In her interview, we asked about something to do with sexual violence, and that's when she disclosed. Why am I giving you that example? Is people who've been assaulted by family, they might not disclose until 10, 5, 30 years, God knows what. That is the time when they feel that they will be comfortable to disclose. This girl disclosed at the time of the interview. And in my documentation, I didn't realize that my documentation would be asked for a few years later, because then she got the courage to report to the police a few years later. As I speak now, I spoke to her on the phone because they've asked me for a statement, and the whole family is broken. Her mother doesn't believe her. Anyone else, people in her family doesn't believe her. And when they went to ask other siblings, this man has been doing it to other siblings within the family. But because it's a family dynamic and their Asian background, the whole family is broken. So, and I understand, and I know where we're coming from in terms of saying that, please, let's make sure that I'm not asking you to conceal these things within families, because the consequences that come with that individual who has been subject to this is really huge. Someone who has been subject to incest will have difficulties in their marriages if they later get married. They will have depression for the rest of their life. They will have signs that will they will have anger issues. Some of the children who've had this sort of sexual behavior or activities within families, they grow up and you're saying, oh, that child is quite promiscuous. Why is that child promiscuous? I don't know how they call it in Luganda. You know, when they say that, oh man, no, you're like, there's a word that they use, but I will use promiscuous. So if a child is so promiscuous, that is the definition that we're going to give them. You know, oh man, you know, why is that? Because they've been subject to things like that. And actually, sometimes it gets to a point that actually your body becomes something else to you because someone has done this to you again and again. So these are things that happen. And we know that sometimes our parents, our mothers, you know, I had a mother, and that broke my heart. The mother was crying, I was crying because I didn't know what to do. because the mother came in and said, the mother's boyfriend was doing this. But why was the mother crying? The child was only 10, but the mother was crying purely because it's something that happened to her at the same age when she was growing up. So some of these things we have to be mindful, because they actually follow from generation to generation. You know, if you don't keep an eye on your children, if you don't listen, sorry.
No, saying if you don't break the chain, you might
That's
find
right.
that it just continues, goes on and on and on. Isa Makubi, I can see your hand up. I'll be coming to you. But another powerful message, Rashida, here from Namkwaya again, Amina, who says some girls face it from husbands of their sisters when they stay with them, because men threaten the girls and don't report. And with fear, the girls allows it every day till the girl gets pregnant. But if you tell your sister, she can say you want to destroy her marriage. So these people don't listen. Same to some stepdads, even who use the stepdaughters, saying you are eating my fees, clothes for nothing, pay for it. I'm not your father. Another, very, very strong message here. Okay, I think that was the one there. So some stepdads, yes. And then from JP, who says men must have a geometer in their brains according to the law. How about the lie from the girl and the lie from the makeup? Oh, that was the question I put to you about the girl who lied. Still, you don't get safe. But then some are just pedophiles or the psychological trauma. The word is mukaba. I think you're asking about the Uganda word that they use for girls who are promiscuous. But let's go back now. Just a point here which was made by Amina about stepdads, and then on the issue of husbands going for the sisters, their wives' sisters, because they are in their position, they are in their place, and therefore can easily do that. Isa Makumbi, I think you have a question for Rashida. Go ahead, Isa Makumbi.
Wa
alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi.
I thank you, the UMC, for having organized a very wonderful occasion, the convention. It was so good and it was nice. Done a very good job, and thank you very much for what you've done.
Thank you very much.
Again, the topic about rape and the rest. Much of the rape is done by not foreigners, not strangers, done by relatives, or people who are so close to the family. What I mean by that, they concede much of those responsibilities, all those rapes. If anybody has been raped by uncle, blah, 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 here they cry that mwana tutuswaza, just keep quiet. And they tend to blame the victim. What I usually encourage people to have education, tell your child or encourage her to say no is no. If anybody touches her, she encourages her to report anything. Never take anything for granted that because I've got an uncle, the uncle is so good, and let the uncle mess around with their children. You should be at least aware that a male and a female put together in a confined place, something might happen. So if bear that in mind, if I've got those visitors who come at our home, when they're around, just be around or nosing around. Never leave them around with strangers or these uncles, blah, 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 of friends. And the other thing is what we need to do, especially the mothers and the family, should educate children about sexual education. That should be very important. You tell the girl, teach the girls to know their rights and how to defend. And if at all anything encroaching to her body, just encourage them to report, however small it is. Because if not kept at the beginning, not dealt with, it will expand and become a very big problem. And the other thing with the boys, those are the big problems. Usually they have to encourage them, tell them with education that if anybody says no, she means no. If you go out of that bracket, forcing yourself on her, that is what they call rape. However small it is a rape. And you have to tell them the repercussions. The scientists, if they're caught, it's not a serious matter. It's a very serious, very, very serious matter. If that one is put across to the children, especially boys, And some girls recently nowadays they've done a bit fun as well. Some of them started raping small boys, the girls. This is where these big girl, big man, big women, they've started encouraging or enticing those young boys to have affairs. As long as you educate sexual education, what are the repercussions? What are the consequences? If at all you've been committed for sexual, it will be on your file for the rest of your life and never go anywhere. And the other thing is, people talk about families, tell them to know their boundaries. If anybody comes around, there should be a boundary. As long as you cross that boundary, it's coming closer to rape or harassment. And the responsibility of the parents. Have senior people around in Uganda leaving their children with strangers or the neighbors. I'm going to the shop, look after my boy, look after my girl. What transpires is a very big issue. And the other thing is children, especially girls, encourage them to say no. And if anything, is encourage or empower them. They know how to defend themselves. And the other side, at times, I usually blame, at times you blame girls. You see, when I was driving around London, you used to see young women walking in those dark places at night. You say how brave they are. You might be brave one day, but next time you become a victim. And usually, if you're in those areas, if anybody rapes you, what is what they do? They end up killing girls. So it's a double edge. Each one has to be very careful. For me, what I usually tell girls, if you're with anybody who's not the same sex, just be on around, just be on a look. And I've seen some cases, people, when they go out, they drink too much and then they lose them. So you know how to control yourself. If anybody tell the boys, if anybody says no, it means so. If you cross the line, it's becoming a rape and it's very serious. And tell them the repercussions and what the law states. You rape someone, minimum is over to 15 years. Imagine a boy of 15 years going behind the bar for 15 years. That's a lot of sacrifice. So that's how I look at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Issa Makumbi. Fantastic submission there. And Jaden here came in to say, correct, Mr. Makumbi, but parents are working against peer pressure. And I would like us to go into this, Rashida, cross into this particular area on peer pressure, where kids are bullied for not having had sex, and this puts them under undue pressure to get it at any cost, even if it means rape or adult dressing. They will just try to sort of push themselves to try to, well, live the part or, look the part or be able to get sort of initiation. It's kind of a baptism in fire, if you wish, where they would now go and have to create conditions that might lead to the situation that we are talking about. Ajat Sarah says, the people, oh, 1 second, just message ran away. The people who report or talk about incest are always the one that ends up being blamed for bringing shame to the family, not the culprit. I would like us to tackle this as well, because these are issues that are deep inside our families, Rashida. And then Amina says, when we say boundaries, we forget how naive the kids can be and how those animals can be so manipulative when talking to their prey. Fantastic one. Actually, let's start with the last one now on the boundaries and naivety of the children, but also look at the peer pressure which leads people to harm. Aisha, I can see your hand is back up. I'll come to you after we hear from Rashida. Rashida, go ahead, please. And if you've just joined us, it is 33 minutes past 9 o'clock. The program is Come, Let's Talk with me, Kassim Kayira. We are live on 75W Radio, live on Umma Connected, on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Zoom. And if you miss any of these programs, remember you can just go back to Facebook. You just go facebook.com/75W Radio. Just look for Come Let's Talk with Kassim Kayira, or just go to YouTube and look for Umma Connected. Just look for Come Let's Talk with Kassim Kayira. You could actually just search for that, and that will take you straight to Umar Connected, and you'll be able to see any of the programs that you have missed. Rashida, go ahead, please. So we'll start with the peer pressure, with the boundaries and naivety of the young children, especially girls.
Yeah, and I will define it for you. It's called child sexual exploitation. Now, child sexual exploitation comes in a variety of things. It comes in all those things that you've sort of discussed. Child sexual exploitation is where most of our children get caught in the middle of all these things. So first of all, when you think about child sexual exploitation, a lot of the times young people are being coerced, young people are being groomed, young people are being manipulated, they're being deceived, they're being sort of lied to in exchange of sort of deceived in exchange of other things like gifts, drugs, sexual activities, and money. And also the other thing that we have to be very mindful of in terms of child sexual exploitation is, so some of the time that some of the children will get involved with these people just because they feel that they're having a loving relationship with these people, or they're having, and then when they think that this person is loving, when they think that they're getting everything that they want, then they will feel that having a sexual activity with this individual, they define it as being consensual, just because, first of all, apart from being coerced, deceived, and manipulated into this, just by a mere getting this child to sort of be friendly, giving them presents, gifts, and everything else, that in itself can lead them into sort of going with this person. And a lot of the times with child sexual exploitation, it will start off very small. It could start off by, we know that our children now are holding phones, children are having phones in terms of, because we give them phones because we want to make sure that they're going home safe, they're coming from school safe. But then other things that they're doing in the phones are other things. It can start off by telling that child to send a picture, when they're a nude picture, to that boy or to that man. And then they start off like that with small things. Then eventually it becomes a bigger opportunity where the perpetrator then gets the chance to actually say, well, you can come and meet me here and then we can do things. Then that's one. That is a child sort of being manipulated with money or drugs. And then there is the other aspect where children are being coerced into or manipulated into joining gangs, or some of them it's actually some sort of initiation whereby, well, if you sleep with so and so, then we can accept you into our gang. If you do A, B, C, D with those boys, then we can accept you into this. We get so many cases like that. But how do we manage them? First of all, we will definitely do forensic medical examination. Some girls, like a case I did over the weekend, the girl was 15. She went out, and this would give you a very clear example. She went out with friends. And I think the other thing that we don't need to forget as Muslim communities, if everyone here is Muslim, and even if you're not Muslim, our children are having alcohol. Children are having alcohol outside when we're not looking. So we have to be very mindful. The girl who was brought in went out with friends, started drinking. Someone gave her a pill, and she doesn't even know whether that pill, all she said is, I was given a yellow pill. Now, that pill could be something, there is something called drug facilitated sexual assault, whereby someone just gives you a drug and then tips you off, and then someone assaults you, has sex with you when you don't have any recollection. So that is that. So children are going out there. This business of, I'm going for sleepover, and again, I'm not objecting to sleepovers, but where are they going and who are they associating with? So we get those cases. A child will come back and tell you, I don't have any recollection, but I'm feeling sore in my vagina. I've never had sex before, but I'm feeling sore down below. I think I was assaulted. Who is the suspect? We don't know. Our job is to do the forensic medical. We do DNA, we take samples from her vagina, we send off those samples for DNA testing. But the repercussion that can come with it, it could be anyone else's other child, or that boy who is also 15, or that boy who is also 16 or 14. Once we've done the forensic medical examination on that child, and the DNA that is present in her vagina is a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old, that DNA is now run on the national database. That child's DNA is now on the database for life as a rapist. So these are the things that we have to, because there's so many aspects in how children can get sort of entwined into this whole business. The drinking, she was 15, she went out to a party, someone gave her alcohol, they gave her a yellow pill. That is one. Gangs, if you don't do A, B, C, D, we won't let you into our gang, or if you don't do that, we're going to do this. 3, I'm lonely. My mom doesn't listen to me. My dad doesn't listen to me, but then someone else is giving her an ear to cry on. So that person is giving her all the nice things that she wants. What happens? In exchange, they start having sex, and it's underage sex. So all those cases. But remember, as I told you, when you're having underage sex with anyone else, you're going to prison, no matter what. So again, it's really difficult. Our job is to safeguard, and our job is obviously, if a child comes and alleges sexual assault, our job is to make sure that we do the DNA. But remember, once your DNA is detected or found, it is run on the national database, and it's on the database for life, that you will be there as a rapist on the national database. So, and I know some of the things, obviously in Uganda, as a result of this, we're having so many underage pregnancies, In this country, underage pregnancies is not so common, purely because here, as long as a child is GILE competent, they can take themselves to a sexual health clinic and they can get a morning after pill. Whereas in Uganda, they won't get a morning after pill. They will just fall pregnant and they will just carry on with the pregnancies. So there's some differences there. I'm open to any question if there's
Sabrina
any.
says here in the chat room, kids will always be kids. Anything you forbid or warn them against seems interesting to them, but they are not fully aware of the consequences. So the adults should always be the adults. Sometimes they call them crews. Oh, do this to join. They join. Oh, to join our crew. Do this to join our crew. Aisha, your hand is back up. I think you might have a question for Rashida here. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I have a question for Rashida regarding the example, Rashida, you gave us regarding the uncle attending to that child. Where I mean, was that child always alone at home? Did she have any sibling? I mean, I'm asking all this, but it takes back to us. Sometimes I put it to us as parents. Leaving that child of 9 years, was that child left alone in the home?
The child was time? The child was with grandma, and obviously grandma had some sort of disability. Grandma is downstairs, the child is upstairs.
All right. So the uncle just go there and pass by and go upstairs.
Yeah.
That's okay. Well, thank you very much, Rashida. But again, as a parent, I really think that it's mainly there was a grandpa and grandma in that house, which is fair enough, and that assumed that grandma probably would oversee. Unfortunately, that did not happen because of probably the disability. But again, as a parent, it goes back to educating our own children, because they are seeing so much on the telly, they are seeing so much on their phone, because we are giving them this phone for safety, and we cannot control everything. So going back to us as parents, it's better we have these open conversations with our children, because we cannot control their phones, we can't control their moving, where they are going with friends, but the onus is on us, to have those open conversations. Otherwise, if we don't have those open conversations, they are bound to kind of find out one way or the other. And we cannot be controlling that. We have parental controls. You have no parental control at home, but when they're outside with friends, they don't have parental
Of the
control.
parental
So it
Yes.
comes back to us. We have to be there for your submission. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aisha. And I can see Rose here. Let's widen the conversation. Rose, your hand is not up, but the way this program works is everybody's an expert. So probably you could have either a question for Rashida, our expert tonight, or maybe just have a comment on what we have had so far. Rose, are you there? Hello, Rose. You can unmute yourself, please. Just click on the unmute button because you are a new guest into the show, and my eyes always see the new guests, and we try. Hello, Rose.
Hello.
Hello. Yes. Good evening.
Good evening to you.
Hey, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
What's your reaction to what you have had so far? We are discussing a very difficult subject tonight. I would like to hear your views on what you have had so far.
I know it is a very interesting subject, and for most of the things that are happening in our homes, and we are ignoring them, especially where the issue where Rashida said about the uncle, that is so common, especially in the African community. It is happening a lot, and people are ignoring it.
Is there something that we can do about it now that we know the uncles have become very problematic? Because on one hand, you want to keep family relations strong. How do you balance between, keeping family together, but also now making sure that the uncles do not, break the taboo?
Maybe we have to be very careful, watch our children, and advise them about I don't know, maybe signs of uncle. I don't know.
It's something inappropriate. It's also
yeah.
important. How do we build now? Actually, one of the issues that came up was when such a situation comes into the family. One, there is first of all that shock of hearing this is the last person that you'd have expected to harm your child, but now it has happened with this uncle. How do we face up to these people before we go to the law? Is there a way that we can resolve this internally, or should we just rush to the law and leave it to the law to handle?
I think this is really difficult because personally, I don't necessarily feel that, because if you resolve internally, that person, that perpetrator will go on and will abuse any other person or every other person. And sometimes by the time that one person has spoken out, that person hasn't just assaulted that one person. Usually there is a chain of other people who they've done it to. And I know that the life that...
No, I was just going to put the same question to Rose, and God forbid, but I was just trying to sort of play devil's advocate. This has happened in the family. This has come up. How would you deal with it, Rose? Because Rashida now is speaking like an expert, but now I would like to hear, as a parent, a normal parent, this has been found in the family. What would be your first reaction? Because there's family to consider on one hand, but there's also the damage that has been done to your child.
For me, I'll just give it to the law, because if we leave it in the family, people will keep on abusing it, and the family won't believe you. Everybody in the family will be against you or the child. So it is better to leave it to the law, and then from that, other people can learn from that.
Fantastic. Back to you, Rashida. Thank you very much, Rose. And for the first time, I'm very impressed. Yes, Rashida. So you say from a legal perspective, you're also agreeing with Rose. It wouldn't be adequate to deal with it internally. You need to take it to the law and then allow the law to take its course.
Because we know rape is definitely found in families. Because I've given you a good example of one person who reported a few years later when she was assaulted in childhood, but she reported when she was an adult. Why did she report as when she was an adult? Because that doesn't go away. It's not something, it's not a walk in the park. It's not something that someone can say, do you know what, maybe forget about that, let's carry on. It does, it lives with you. It lives with you for as long as you live. And usually people, when they grow up, when you're a child, you probably don't see it, but when you then grow older, that's when you start realizing that there's certain things that are affecting you. Somewhere along the line, something affects me. Because when I had a conversation with that girl, the one thing that she said, I asked her 2 questions. I said, why now? She said, Rashida, it has never gone away from me. I've always thought about it. And you know what she said? She says, Rashida, I'm married, but my husband has always seen that there was something wrong with me. So somewhere along the lines, there's certain behaviors that she was portraying that the husband, they were very visible to her husband, that were easily noticeable. But also she had children. She went on to have children of her own. Because then how do you grow up when you've been assaulted and then you grow up to have children of your own? And then how are you going to actually teach them to sort of be mindful of perpetrators when your own issue has never been resolved? That's where it becomes very difficult, because that pain will always remain with that person. And we can talk, we can advise, but we don't know that how that individual is feeling. And I think sometimes people want to have some sort of justice, in a sense that this has been done, now I think I can move on. The family repercussions, I know it's big, and I know that so many skeletons have gone in the grave without actually having been disclosed. But it's one of those things in life, unfortunately, that no one can ever tell when one is ready to divulge the information of reporting. But if you can report, the earlier the better. And I think what someone else did touch base on it, in a sense that how can we avoid these things now that we can have these discussions? Now that we're not going to tackle what's happened in the past. We're here now. And what are we saying? We're saying that the best thing that we can ever do for our children is, Aisha, talk to me when something happens to you. Aisha, when my daughter, I say to her, even when she's itchy down below, and she says, Mom, I'm itchy down below. I'm like, did anyone touch you there? And I know that is a very difficult question that one can ask their daughter or their child. But I would ask her, maybe because of the job I do, that I'm very blunt with that. And I say, Aisha, did anyone touch you there? Or did something happen? No, because if you don't then tell your children that, call a spade a spade. If you have to say, Aisha, did something happen to you down below? She should be in position to tell you. She's in a position. If you keep your children able, if you let your children able to tell you, and you give them that ear, and actually they're open to coming. Let's not forget these things are happening to boys as well. And I think
I was actually about to say, I was actually about to say that our concentration has looked so much on the girl chat, and someone did raise it in the chat room. I was just about to ask whether you've had cases, of boys, and what sort of form that has taken. And Safina, your hand is up. I've seen it. I'll come to you. Let's first hear from Rashida on this particular one, on boys and how they've, managed to deal with this situation. How does it come across?
And you can imagine with boys, it's even harder. Young children, a young child will come and tell you, will tell you as it is, that this has happened to me, or so and so has put something in my back passage, or they will come and tell you it hurts. So some children will keep quiet just because they've been sworn to keeping quiet. So there is that. One of the things that you have to watch out is children's behavior, demeanor. How are they presenting? Because some of them might not necessarily talk. In fact, one child had been anally assaulted, and he had difficult going to the toilet because obviously it was sore. And obviously there was a lot of implications for that, because he couldn't go to the toilet because he was sore, he became constipated, and so many other things sort of come with it. But also, on the other hand, so because again, sometimes we tend to forget that maybe if someone is LGBT, if someone is gay, maybe something will happen to a gay man just because that's the sort of activity that they do. I can assure you that this activity, when a perpetrator is ready, when a rapist is ready, it doesn't matter whether you're a man. We do get cases where a man is straight, he has a wife at home, he went out with lads as per normal, he was given something in his drink without knowing, and he was, as a consequence of it, he was raped. Sometimes there are drugs that are called death trap drugs, that when someone takes them, they sort of make them, they arouse them in that sort of mannerism where the person can actually give in into sexual activity. Does that mean that they're gay? It's not, doesn't mean that they're gay, but it means they're actually, and they're beside themselves, because that's not what they are, but they've been assaulted, they've been caught in the position where they've been raped because they don't know what just happened. So boys, it's the same concept. I gave an example of when I first started working at the Havens, when a young boy was brought in, 4-year-old, a 16-year-old was making him suck his penis. And this is a 4-year-old boy to a 16-year-old boy. So we have to be very mindful at the ages as well. And I know that especially in these westernized countries, we do get childcare from different avenues. But please be mindful of where you're leaving your child. It doesn't matter what sex that child is, something could happen to them, be it a girl or be it a boy. When someone is a perpetrator, the way they work, and they usually will see people, victims from a mile, that they can easily, because a lot of the times when we talk to people and ask us something like this ever happened to you, 50% of the time they've been assaulted before, but they've never spoken out.
Right, Etel. Safina, your hand is up. Let's hear what you've got. Is it a question or a point that you would like to raise with Rashida? Safina, can I unmute yourself?
Thank you very much. Mine is just a case I had as a teacher. There was this girl who joined, and she came in S1, and she hated male teachers with a passion, and it was kind of surprising. Anything, even if the teacher just got her late or was trying to tell us something, she could scream and start crying, and then, talk on top of her voice. Then I observed this girl over time, and then at a given time, I said, I think I need to have a talk with this girl and find out what's going on. So I drafted some kind of questionnaire and called her in my office. We sat. Then I'm asking her, do you know who you are? Who are you? Tell me about yourself, And then, in fact, she came with this other, she was closed off, kind of, not wanting to open up. But the way I started the conversation, she kind of started getting into it. And then she tells me her mom died when she was 5. And I think that dad had died before she was born. And her auntie, a sister to her mother, took her on. And she had a 16-year-old son who started raping her at 6 years. So he raped and raped and raped. And I think one time she told her auntie what was going on, and the aunt didn't want to believe her. In fact, the aunt became so tough on her, was also beating her up, making her do all the manual work at that age, 6 to 7. It became so unbearable for her. She ran away from home and became a street kid. And then there came this organization that claims to work with street children. They took her on, and she had talent. These kids who love to dance and sing. So she was put into a school. Now the head of that organization, this is around 9 years old, he also started raping her. So she had been raped from the age of 6.
Yeah.
So this is why she hated all male figures whatsoever. So I sat with her, and now that was around, she was in S4, about to leave school. I didn't know what to do, because back home in Uganda, we don't have so much support for such, especially for cases that happened sometime back. So as we said, or as you said it, when someone is raped, this doesn't go away. Right. She's growing up like that. So I tried to counsel her, but I don't know if it really made an impact on her or something. But that's something I discovered along the way. She had been raped from 6 all the way, and she just said it all men. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Safina. Very difficult conversation, but these are the realities because nothing hypothetical. We are talking about situations that did actually happen. Now, as we conclude, Rashida, what sort of measures should we take? What can we do now to protect not only our children, but also ourselves? The men who are taking the how, what sort of advice do we have around sexual abuse and protecting oneself? Because ultimately, I think it's about men protecting themselves, women protecting themselves, children protecting themselves. What can we do as protective measures to cushion ourselves from this potential?
I think, first of all, we shouldn't dismiss when a child or when anyone. I think one of the things that we have to understand that someone reporting or someone coming out to talk about sexual violence or talking about what's happened to them, it might take 10 years. Some might even disclose when they're 50. Some may even disclose at whatever point. What we have to understand that there is never the best time. When that person is ready to tell you, please receive that person and receive the information. But also, as well as you're receiving everything else, we should be quite vigilant around people who are with us, because suddenly you could see someone just change of behavior, change of demeanor, change of the way they react. Or if a child has been going to school, then suddenly they don't want to go to school. So there are certain things that that you have to really be very mindful about. And I think being open, having that sort of open forum to say, and I think maybe some of these subjects should even. I was speaking to one of the ladies at work, and she's a Muslim, she's a convert. She converted to Islam when she was about 18. She's Irish. And the one thing that she told me, we were talking about this, and she said to me, Rashida, I feel like going to tell all the imams that when we finish to have khutbah, that we should introduce a different way. We should introduce some of these discussions. Why is she saying that? This is a white woman saying, yes, she's an Islam convert, but she's saying that some of these things, because in the mosque, this is where we have the biggest congregation. And maybe in this congregation, some of this message can hit home. Because if we don't send this message across, if we're not afraid of talking about this subject, I am telling you, this subject is quite dangerous in a sense that you can grow up with a child and not know what is happening. I'll give you one example. I mean, I can give you 1,000 examples, but I had a Black child who came to us. Her parents were in Nigeria, and there were two of them. They had brought them in this country to study. She had been assaulted at a very young age. I think she must have been around 17 or 18. I sat with this girl. Every time I see a Black person come into the Havens, I literally sit with them and have like a one-to-one and have almost like a mother. I mother every child who comes into the Haven. As long as they're Black, I'm like, what's going on for you? I saw one the other day. I'll finish off with this one first. This girl, all I could see, all she wanted is talk. But I couldn't talk to her all the time. Guess what? A few months later, I saw this girl. She was pregnant, and that broke my heart. This girl was brought into this country to study. She was then sexually assaulted. A few months later, she became pregnant. Why? Because then she decided to go in a different way, because maturity seemed to be the best decision or the best option for her. And she went on to have a child, but she's also a baby. She still wore 18. That is one. I saw another child the other day who was Black, transgender, she was male to female. Sorry, female to male. This girl, well, boy now, this boy, I I had a long conversation with him. He was very angry, very, very angry, very everything. And I had to ask, I sit down and I said, what happened? Where did it start? When did you transition? And this boy said to me, I transitioned when I was 14. She had had a mastectomy, meaning her breasts had been cut off. And so she had transitioned up from her breasts up. But I didn't judge this girl or this boy. I didn't judge him. I sat down with him and I said, what is going on for you? This child broke down and cried. And the first thing that he did, he said to me is, I want my mother. He then dialed his mother's phone. The mother refused to talk to him. I was there. I started this case at 12 o'clock midday. We went home at 10 p.m. with this child. This child broke down and said, I want my mother. Why am I telling you this? Because I think it will break every mother in the room. He said, I wanted my mother. We called his mother. Mother refused to pick up. Mother said, I can't deal with that child because of A, B, C, D. It's been so much. It's been one thing after another with this child. I say to this child, let me take your phone. And this is me being a professional. But I said, I will call your mother using my phone. I called the mother using my phone. I was working with a doctor, and the doctor is Nigerian. I said, do you mind speaking in your language to this mother? We spent almost an hour talking to the mother. At the end of the conversation, this boy said to me, you've been more than a mother to me than my own mother has ever been. Now, I was only a stranger. He only saw me for just those hours.
What had transpired then, Rashida? It sounds like a very powerful story, but what had happened to him now?
He had sexually assaulted.
By
But the whole story, no. But do you remember when I talked about being promiscuous?
Yes.
The whole story started from childhood sexual abuse. So childhood sexual abuse, yes, that sort of really kicked him off in a different direction. And ever since then, because one thing happened, came out, and another and another and another. And at some point he got me crying, and I said, stop talking, because you're getting me crying and I'm crying and you're crying. And in the end, but just those few hours I spoke to this boy, he went away feeling that actually someone has listened. Now, I can't continue to call him because my professionalism has to stop somewhere. Obviously, all we have to do is talk to the children. Why have I told you that story? Is the concept of it is that sort of understanding that actually going on to the level of your children, giving them that ear to cry on. Don't underestimate anyone's decision. And let's not think that this happens. It's not only to boys, girls, but to babies as well, to grandparents as well. We've had cases whereby we've gone into hospitals. We've had professionals abusing patients. So there is all those concepts. So this goes much wider. So if someone comes and tells you at any given point, please listen and then understand. But also, let's not shy away from the law. Let's not shy away from the law, because then if we don't protect one, then we're then failing to protect other people behind that.
Isma, please, if you can have our T consent clip, I think it's what we will finish our program with. Rashida, you've been fantastic. People have asked me to share your contacts, which I've done because I know you wouldn't mind, especially considering what we are dealing with as a community now. And our community is growing. And therefore, when we are having conversations like this, I think we are sort of opening up. Where someone might think we are so blunt, we are so vulgar even to some point, but this was deliberate, just to make sure we talk about the untalkables so that we demystify this whole area and make sure that in case you find yourself in a situation like this, you would be in a good position to know. Isma, please let me know when you have that clip ready, and then I'll just wrap up with Rashida. Rashida, I think definitely we've just touched the surface of this. I
That's
hope
right.
I hope you will be available to us whenever we need you to come to, especially considering this whole forensics and police. But maybe one last question while Isma gets our clip ready. It's about you spoke briefly about the implications on DNA, someone's DNA being on the system, and where how far that goes, how much of that destroys a person's career or even character. Um,
So
yes, please go ahead.
even I work within the service, but I wouldn't necessarily want to go on dilly-dallying into the forensic room with my whole DNA going everywhere, because somewhere along the lines my DNA or my child's DNA, my partner's DNA can end up on the swabs, and then their DNA could end up on the national database. Now, so with regards to DNA, any single person, our job is we advise, we do the forensic medical examinations, we send off the samples for DNA testing. If DNA comes back positive on those swabs or semen detected, that semen or DNA, the DNA is run on the national database. And then if DNA is detected, because what happens is, if they run the DNA on the national database, then that DNA is looking for a hit, is looking to see if that person is on a database as a rapist before. And if that DNA is run on the national database and there is no hit on the database, that means that your DNA stays on the database for life. This is what we usually say. If the person has had any consensual sexual intercourse with anyone else and then they get assaulted, it's very important that we eliminate that person's DNA. Why? So if anyone has had sexual contact with their wife and then their wife gets assaulted, we have to find out whether they've had any consensual sex with anyone else, because before you know, your DNA could end up on the national database. Now, you could be going on your business, dilly-dallying everywhere, and then somewhere your DNA is taken. They run it on the national database, it pings. And when it pings, then the police now is looking at you thinking, oh, this person is already in the national database. And actually the DNA is there as a rapist. Then you have to explain yourself why your DNA is on the national database. I'll give you one example. One client attended like years ago, was assaulted, didn't report to the police. We submitted the samples. DNA was detected, was run on the national database. There was no hit on the database, which means that no one else could be found. That DNA sat on the national database. The suspect then went outside London. This is what we're saying, that a rapist will always be a rapist. Went outside London, raped someone else. DNA was run on the national database. Then there was a DNA hit. Then that person had 2 rape cases on him. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It's
So the
very
implication, so your DNA.
Are there no other instances? Are there no other instances where your DNA, for example, you've come to this country, you've sought asylum, you have to give your DNA, for example, if you're going to bring your family to make sure like your kids are yours, and is there not a likelihood, like mistakes normally do happen in situations where your DNA might end up, still on the system for a different reason, but then it appears then to sort of bring problems.
So your DNA, yeah, so we do have cases. I mean, I deal with most of the results that come back from the police. So I deal with most of those results, and it could be that usually when the DNA comes, when the results come back, and they're like, Rashida, we've got these results, but there's a mixture of DNA. Did that person have any consensual sex with anyone else? And we check and say yes, they had consensual sex with job logs. Then job logs can get eliminated from that equation because their DNA was not there. You see what I mean? So we usually have to get your DNA. If you are not the suspect, we get your DNA and try and eliminate it out and leave the other person. Alternatively, the police can come back to us and say, Rashida, there's DNA, but there's a hit on the database. And we will usually ask, what is that for? It could be drink driving, or it could be that actually your DNA was there just because you maybe domestic violence, that actually you fought with your wife, or your wife reported you for something and then your DNA ended up there. Now your DNA is now got back onto the DNA as a rapist. So now you've got 2 charges.
Well, I was just about to say good night because Isma has just told me the computer has frozen and won't be able to play our clip. But as you are mentioning that now, something is just cropped up, which I think probably will be my last question, which is, my wife, well, God forbid, but a woman has gone and claimed, like she's been sexually assaulted by the husband.
Yeah.
That lack of consent at a certain time. You go to do your tests, and in taking the swabs, it becomes clear along the way she's also had sex probably a day before with someone else. Does that get delved to the husband in the process of the investigations, or that is just in the laboratories? Because I'm seeing now a home getting wrecked beyond just the allegation, which might be a moment of anger, but then you realize there's something else coming up.
And many times clients would not want to divulge that information. So in fact, some of them won't go ahead with the forensic just because there's someone else's DNA that could be picked up. So that could be one of the reasons someone says, no, I don't want to have a forensic because someone else's DNA is going to be picked up, because then they can show that actually either she's cheated elsewhere, but because sometimes they don't realize that by reporting to us, one of the questions we ask, have you had any consensual sex with anyone else in the last 10 days? And if you have, their DNA could be picked up. And then what happens is the results come back and we're like, actually, Rashida, this client attended, we've got 2 mixtures of DNA. And then what we'll usually do, as long as that husband has been reported, and if the police have arrested him, they will have his DNA, which means that they will actually eliminate the 2 DNAs separately.
Right.
So it becomes very easier.
The husband wouldn't get to know about this. This is an internal matter that is definitely left outside. Right.
No.
Oh, Rashida, this has been very, very fantastic. Thank you very much. And I'm sure my audience tonight will agree that we've had very difficult but yet very essential conversation to have, like we often do. Every Tuesday, 8 p.m., we are live on 75W Radio, live on Uma Connected, discussing different topics, and it doesn't matter what topic it is, we'll just treat it with decency. Rashida, it's been an honor. Rashida Namsisi, an expert on forensics and works alongside, well, as well as with the Metropolitan Police, but with the NHS. And, well, we got it. You had it. Thank you very much. Hope to see you next week, Tuesday, same time, inshallah. It's been a very, very fantastic. Oh, it looks like there's a hand up from 75W Radio. Might be someone who is burning, might be Baker. It would be unfair for me to go when the hand is up. Let's have that. So 75, unmute yourself, please. Yes, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. Is that Shamim?
Sorry. It's Shamim, it's Baker, it's not Baker.
Okay.
Yeah, just want to, good evening, Rashida.
Good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, just on the top, you were talking about DNA. Now I'm just asking because I know that if you want to go in the police, for example, there are different stages, and one of them is taking a DNA. How long do those how long does it stay on the system?
So the police have their own the police will have their own database.
Mm-hmm.
So the police, so that DNA, if you went for a job, your job will not be, i.e., they will take my DNA as well, but my DNA will not be on the national database. It will be on the Havens database. So will the police, and the police have to have their DNA because remember they are first sort of point of contact. You know, they're the first attendant to crime, so they will have to have their own DNAs, but it has to be separately. So you want your DNA will never be on the national database. But it's different for me, say for example, because even though we work hand in hand with the police, but remember, I work within the forensic, actually, I work within the forensic setting, whereby I will be present when they're handing over those samples. So I have to be very mindful. This is why when we're doing the forensics, we're totally gowned up, masked, and everywhere else we're putting on like proper PPE so that our DNA is not anywhere. So because then that DNA, even if they found our DNA can be eliminated from it. But a lot of the times so the police will also have their own DNA within the police. We will have our own DNA. All sexual assault referral centers have their own DNA as well. So you will have your own DNA sort of kept away. So they will always protect you as staff.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you.
No
Thank you very
worries.
much, Shamim. And Amina here says these days we are told that our confidential information can be released to the police when requested. I think that is dependent on the circumstances. So she was thinking that DNA can be released as well, shared from your database to the police database. Is that something that can be done?
No, because
yeah. No.
Every single organization is protected by confidentiality and all that. So they can't. So the reason why your DNA, like that within our setting, that DNA, because that's what we do. We're looking for DNA. We're looking for semen. We're looking for the perpetrators. We're looking for a crime. So unless the police is looking for a crime, then they will be searching for DNA. But not every crime they're searching for DNA. They're searching other things. But then again, in this country, a lot of the things the police will do, first of all, is take your own DNA. But again, it's only in a crime.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rashida, once again. And thank you very much to everyone who has been part of this conversation. You are stars. Hope to see you next week, inshallah, Tuesday, same time. Barakallahu fikum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi